There are two ways of looking at Masonic music. The first of these is to look at the composers throughout history who have been Freemasons and have composed specifically Masonic music. The second is to look at the place that music plays in the ceremonies conducted in the lodge. What is its purpose, and where did this music come from? In tonight's video, we will be looking at both topics.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Music has always been an essential part of speculative Masonry, from the inclusion of Masonic songs in the Book of Constitutions to the use of musicians by William Preston in the ceremonies of the Lodge of Antiquity. The use of music, both as a means of meditation and method of bonding among the brethren, is well established, if not actually codified. It is simply an intended aspect of the Masonic assembly. Ritually, music is one of the 7 liberal arts and sciences revered by the craft, and is referred to at least twice in most Masonic jurisdictions in the world. These references are publicly available from many sources, but they find their origin in Preston's Illustrations of Masonry. Hearing is that sense by which we distinguish sounds and are capable of enjoying all the agreeable charms of music. And music teaches the art of forming concords so as to compose delightful harmony by a proportional arrangement of acute, grave, and mixed sounds. This art, by a series of experiments, is reduced to a science with respect to tones and the intervals of sound only. As with most of those other liberal arts, the use of music has become absent from many lodges. However, in those lodges where it is present, it has become almost unimaginable to conduct a meeting without it. Indeed, in an observant lodge, music is a full partner with the ritual, whether it be in the form of Masonic opening and closing odes sung by the brethren, or the performance of, or playing of recorded music throughout the meeting, as well as at significant points during the degrees. Then, of course, there are the songs meant to be sung by the brethren at the festive board after the meeting. A further note is in order in relation to the use of music which might be easily recognizable as religious or political by its melodies, but has verses that pertain solely to Masonry, or which are placed in a Masonic context. One of the most common cultural practices in almost every civilization has been to take melodies understood in one context and render them into another. From the bawdy 17th century drinking song that would become the American national anthem, to the ancient Chinese folk melodies which would become the propaganda songs of the Chinese Communist Party, people from all walks of life have taken one popular melody and put new words to it, which change its meaning and purpose. William Preston himself offered up 2 separate Masonic texts to be sung to the tune of God Save the King. There is a tremendous tradition of composition among Freemasons. From the early 18th century right down to the present day, significant figures in musical history have not only been Freemasons, but have also composed specifically Masonic music. Possibly the most famous, and of course best known Masonic composer, was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I have previously made a video exploring some of the Masonic elements that are present in his opera, The Magic Flute. But Mozart wrote many other works specifically for the Freemasons following his initiation in 1784. It was through his influence that both his father Leopold and his contemporary Joseph Haydn were initiated in 1785. One of the most well-known of Mozart's Masonic works is the Masonic funeral music of the same year. Beyond Mozart, there are many composers and compositions which drew their inspiration from the craft. Some of the more notable and possibly surprising of these I will briefly touch on now. Thomas Arne was an English composer who was born, lived and died in Covent Garden. He was described as an active Freemason, not surprising as he lived near Freemasons' Hall. Unfortunately, I have no details of which lodge he belonged to, but in 1762 he composed his greatest work, an opera, Artaxerxes, which was a great success. It was commissioned by the Prince of Wales. This contained the song Rule Britannia, which has become a national song sung at many large functions. He also wrote an arrangement of God Save the King in the score, which became the national anthem, and while he may not have composed the tune, which is most probably derived from a folk tradition, the anthem is commonly ascribed to him. Frederick the Great is commonly remembered as a great ruler and general, but he was also a poet, philosopher, composer, and musician. He became King of Prussia in 1740, was married to an Austrian princess but had no children. He built up the Prussian military machine and bureaucracy and engaged in many successful military activities. He was an accomplished flautist who wrote 100 flute sonatas and several concertos and symphonies. He was initiated, passed, and raised in one day at Brunswick on August 14, 1738, in secret due to his father's opposition. He immediately formed a lodge in Rheinsberg, which attracted a number of aristocratic initiates. He was responsible for granting Berlin lodges considerable support and privileges, and remained a keen Freemason for the rest of his life. As mentioned earlier, Joseph Haydn became a Freemason under the encouragement of Mozart in 1785. Haydn's output was immense as he lived a long time, 77 years. He was born 18 years before the deaths of Handel, J.S. Bach and Vivaldi, and died 4 years before the births of Verdi and Wagner. He composed 104 symphonies, 20 keyboard concertos, 16 concertos for other instruments, 14 masses, 2 oratorios, numerous operas, 50 piano sonatas, 84 string quartets, 100 sonatas for baritone, and many songs. He was initiated in Vienna on February the 11th, 1785, in Lodge True Concord. Franz Liszt was the premier pianoforte virtuoso of his day and a popular composer who was celebrated throughout Europe. He was born in Rading in what was then Hungary, but later became part of Austria. Liszt was a complex man who combined adherence to the Catholic faith and Freemasonry with flamboyant living and many mistresses. But for various reasons he did not marry any of them. He had 3 children, of whom 2 died in 1860. Cosima Wagner was his daughter, and he helped Richard Wagner to promote his career, even though it was not always appreciated. He undertook concert tours all over Europe and Russia. He was initiated into Lodge Unity in Frankfurt am Main on September the 18th, 1841, where he satisfactorily answered the 3 required questions. He was passed to the 2nd degree in Lodge zur Eintracht in Berlin in 1842, and 2 weeks later was made a Master Mason in the same lodge when he was made an honorary member. Sir Arthur Seymour Sullivan was a child prodigy. He wrote his first composition at the age of 8. He was admitted into the choir of Chapel Royal, where he became a soloist. After his success with the one-act opera Cox and Box, Richard D'Oyly Carte, manager of Royalty Theatre, introduced him to W.S. Gilbert, with whom he produced Thespis. They then produced Trial by Jury, which was a great success. This was the first of 14 operettas which made them famous, and thereafter were called the Savoy Operas. He is also, of course, well known for writing The Lost Chord and Onward Christian Soldiers. he was regarded as the greatest English composer since Purcell. He was initiated into Harmony Lodge in Richmond in 1865, but limited his involvement to being lodge organist. Gilbert was admitted to Inner Scottish Lodge, St Macar No. 54, in 1871. Thereafter they progressed together in the Royal Arch and the Rose Croix. Sullivan was appointed Grand Organist in 1887, the year of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, despite his not having gone through the chair of his lodge. He gave his name to the Arthur Sullivan Lodge, No. 2156, which still meets in Manchester. John Philip Sousa was an interesting man, known as the March King for the 136 marches he composed, including The Washington Post, The Stars and Stripes Forever, Semper Fidelis, and Liberty Bell. Apart from all this, he wrote several novels, a dozen operettas, and was a championed clay pigeon shooter. He joined the US Marine Corps at the time of the Spanish-American War and gained the rank of Sergeant Major. In 1917, on declaration of war, he was commissioned in the US Naval Reserve, rising to the rank of Lieutenant Commander. He also invented the sousaphone, a large modified tuba, which is now used in most American military bands. As a Freemason, he was initiated in 1881 in Hiram Lodge No. 10 in Washington, and progressed through several orders and became a Shriner in 1922. He remained a member throughout his life. Jean Sibelius was born in Finland, the son of a doctor. He wrote 7 symphonies and many other works, including a very fine violin concerto. He is also well known for Finlandia and Valse Triste. He wrote a great deal of Masonic music designed to be played during ceremonies. These works are still the only authorized music allowed in Finnish lodges. After he turned 60, he wrote no further major works, but did write smaller pieces. He wrote some ritual works as late as 1946. Sibelius was a founding member of Suomi Lodge No. 1 and often played the organ for them. He was appointed Grand Organist of the Grand Lodge of Finland, despite, like Sullivan, never having gone through the chair of his lodge. He remained a Mason throughout his life. Irving Berlin was born Israel Berlin in eastern Russia, one of 8 children born to Moses, a kosher butcher and cantor in his local synagogue. In 1893, the family emigrated to the USA to escape the regular pogroms in Russia. He went on to write over 3,000 songs, 19 musicals, and the scores for 18 films. Everyone knows White Christmas, Easter Parade, and There's No Business Like Show Business, and God Bless America, which he wrote when he was in the Army in 1918, and Annie Get Your Gun, amongst many others. In 1910, he received his first degree in Munn Lodge, New York, and progressed over the years to 32nd degree and became a Shriner in 1911 and a life member of his lodge from 1936. Kento Masuda is a Japanese composer and recording artist. He was born in 1973 and is a member of the Recording Academy. His work has been described as one of this world's artistic treasures. His composing style is characterized by intricate keyboard lines with obvious melodies, deep percussion grooves, and layers of rhythm and sound that draw the listener into a whole new world with each note. Masuda says he was influenced by both Johann Sebastian Bach and Disney's Alan Menken. He joined the craft in 2017, and his certificate is proudly displayed on his website alongside the many other significant awards that he has received. Other modern Freemasons of note include Louis Satchmo Armstrong, a great musician who is regarded by some as having been a Freemason, but no credible evidence exists that he was a member of the craft. He is listed as belonging to Montgomery Lodge No. 18, Prince Hall, but this lodge never existed. However, he did write a song called Hello Brother, which gives the impression that he was. Nat King Cole, a great musician and entertainer, was a member of Weller Lodge number 49 Prince Hall in Los Angeles. Rick Wakeman, an English keyboard player and songwriter, made his name as a soloist with the progressive rock band Yes, with whom he worked on and off from 1971 to 2004. He is a member of Chelsea Lodge number 3098, made up of entertainers. Having looked at the illustrious history of Masonic composers, let's now turn to the other side of music in Freemasonry, music in the lodge. Freemasonry was of great appeal at the turn of the 20th century, when the religious revival of the later Victorian era led to the building of dozens of churches and chapels in every town. Certainly, even the most modest chapel has a pipe organ, and every parlour had a piano, and it was quite the norm in those days for people to gather round singing as a family. Consequently, plenty of children learned to play the piano, and some were drawn into the church at an early age to learn to play the organ. As Freemasonry flourished, each Masonic centre had an organ and a regular supply of initiates who could play the piano and thus the organ. The music used in lodges in those days was taken directly from hymns ancient and modern, and other worthy tomes with several hundred tunes. Sometimes the words came directly from the hymn books, particularly those that were not Trinitarian or directly Christian. For other odes, the words were written by the more erudite brethren. Quite a number of lodges in the early days used Anglican chants, a most awkward way of setting words to music, but the chants were sufficiently well known to appeal to those who joined the craft. As other orders spread, Holy Royal Arch, Mark Masonry, Royal Arch Mariner, Knights Templar, and Rose Croix, the membership, and particularly the leaders, had come from the established traditions of the craft and were steeped in the knowledge of Victorian church music. Even today, in the 21st century, there are Royal Arch Mariner lodges and Rose Choir chapters that use Anglican chants, and nearly all lodge music today has its origins in the Anglican church traditions of the 19th century. The snag is, adherence to and practice of these faiths has dwindled, as has the supply of experienced church organists. Gradually, during the 20th century, the organ building trade has declined. There are scores of redundant pipe organs in churches that have closed, and any attempt to move these to new locations has proven very expensive indeed, particularly as the skills of experts who can work in wood and leather has withered. Meanwhile, the electric organ was invented and became affordable in the late 1930s. These did not hit Masonic temples until the 1950s, by which time there were some bargains to be had in the second-hand market, and there is nothing a lodge secretary and treasurer likes more than a bargain. When a member's family is bereaved and an electric organ from the lounge has no further family use, and when it is discovered that there is no second-hand market even if the walnut veneer seems perfect, then it makes an ideal bequest to the local Masonic hall. The consequence of this is that we have far more electric organs than pipe organs, and of course an ever-diminishing band of worthy volunteers who can entice the right sort of sounds from among the vibratos, tremulants and wah-wah knee-jerks that are all too often heard to emanate from these instruments in our lodges. The early electric organs from the post-war period were pretty abysmal. By the end of the 20th century, new developments in audio technology has spawned some excellent digital organs. Whilst there is a small supply of organists finishing their formal tuition every year, it is proving impossible for Freemasonry to recruit skilled organists. Instead, we recruit from within, and do this rather badly. The best plan is to ask a potential candidate at their very first meeting with a lodge committee if they can play a keyboard. By this means, we might identify those who could become our organists. Once they are initiated and see an old chap sitting at the organ, they'll be much too timid to raise their head above the parapet and offer to take over. So we are often left with the unschooled, reluctant organist who can easily be put off by comments from those who believe they know better, but who never touch a note. Knowing when to stop. That can be the pitfall of many an organist. There is nothing more unmusical than a procession that stops, and the music does likewise instantly and without drawing to a musical conclusion. This is rather more difficult to achieve for those who don't have a natural facility for extemporization. One solution may be to have learnt some two-bar phrases that end with a dominant and then a tonic chord in the player's favourite keys. Hopefully, these can be used as the procession ends to soothe the anxiety of the DC and others. The greatest secret of Freemasonry is how and when we are all promoted. One trick is to play the organ. The odds are you'll be left alone in the corner for several years until someone notices your contemporaries are through the chair, and then may ask if you wish to progress. For a number of years, CD players and computer discs that have made suitable music pre-recorded for our ceremonies have been available. These too have their problems. The first being that the man who has promoted the use of recorded music and who had brought in all the kit and hooked up amplifiers and speakers is not immortal. These people grow old just like organists, or their loyalty to a temple or lodge dwindles, and it seems just as hard to find a willing successor. In any case, the real skill is in knowing the ritual thoroughly so that the recording can begin at the right moment. To ensure that it ends at the right moment is far harder than at first it would seem. As I said before, to bring processional music to a graceful conclusion is almost impossible at the click of a switch. But we can't get enough organists, so let's refine the skills of the roadies and the disc jockeys by inviting them to lodges of instruction to make everyone aware of the options available. Meanwhile, the faithful old organists do this on autopilot, and no one notices the skills are necessary until they are not there. There is a case for explaining this to all senior DCs. For the big showcase events like a Grand Lodge, the Grand DC is so busy worrying about protocol, who should stand where in the lineup prior to processing, and making sure that the sword and banner are deposited in a place of safety, that even they can forget to help the organist by coordinating the movements to the music. How often have you heard the DC call "To order, brethren," from the west door? Then there is a gap when the organist has begun to play and the escort are still wondering whether to step off with the left foot or not. The opposite can occur too. Often the organist has no line of sight to the west doors and suddenly finds a body of men marching towards him while he awaits the crucial clue of "To order, brethren." There are very few temples where the organist is ideally placed. The usual criteria is how close is the 15-amp power socket, rather than whether the organist can see and hear what's going on. Another local variation is the DC or bodyguard's idea of marching. I assume it must be in places where the organists are scarce that the escort parties set up their own marching on the spot, very rhythmically and then moving forward. The visiting organist has to copy the pace and make his march music fit the predestined pace of the moving column. Organists are only human. They want music to add to the splendour of the occasion, but often feel they have to fight an uphill battle to achieve this.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts, and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.